And now I wish to move on to another topic. Again, I credit independent journalist with the amazing sources and information, Avi Weiss, who in this same interview, which I heard recently, he stated the following. This is much more earth-shattering than the previous piece of information. And this refers to Shmini Atzeret, that is to say, the 22nd of Tishrei of this Jewish year, which is the 7th of October 2023, according to the Gregorian calendar, when, of course, Israel was invaded and attacked, on which day approximately 1,500 Israelis were killed, massacred, raped, burned alive, in some cases babies burned alive, roasted alive in ovens, and 250 odd Israelis were kidnapped and transferred to Gaza. So on that day, the attack began at 6:29 a.m. That is recognized and agreed to by all. What was not clear till I heard this interview, and no one has denied it, it's not been picked up in a major way, but I heard it mentioned today by another channel of reliable information here in Israel, known as the Tov channel. On that day, being made aware of the situation, at 11:20, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, we are at war, and therefore the rules of engagement now must change. Not that the rules of engagement were logical, reasonable, or moral in any way, certainly not in accordance with the Torah, but also not with any kind of normative common sense or healthy intuition. He said the rules of engagement now have to change, and he wanted to begin to activate the army in various ways, because from 6:29 a.m. until this point, essentially, the army had not received any orders to do anything, and they had not been told we are at war and now act accordingly. The Attorney General and the Chief Judge Advocate General of the military justice system, Tomi Yerushalmi, her name is, and the so-called Attorney General of this country, whose name is Miara, last name, they said to him, you can't declare war, you haven't got the authority. According to law, the cabinet must declare that we're in a state of war. At 2:30 p.m. on that day, this is now 8 hours after the invasion and the attack, the war or limited security cabinet met, and at 4:30 they disbanded and they announced that we are at war. Again, those same legal mavens whose true motivations and purposes one can only begin to divine from what I'm telling you, they said, no, that's not good enough. According to the law, the full cabinet has to announce that we're in a state of war. The full cabinet was convened only some hours later, with the result that only at 8:10 p.m. on that day, in other words, 14 hours after the invasion and attack, by which time almost all the damage had been done.
Correct.
Was the Prime Minister and the government able to state officially, with the legal imprimatur of these juristocracy, this mafia of jurists and lawyers? As we all know, the rule of law eventually becomes the rule of lawyers, and only at that point were we officially at war. This now explains to us that which was unclear and a great conundrum for so many people from that day to this, namely, where was the Israeli Air Force? Where was the Israeli army? The answer is they were grounded and they were unable to move. They did not receive any orders. No, they could not be told that we were at war and could not respond accordingly. That is the fact. That is what Avi Weiss recently revealed. Now, take it away.
Well, the issue here is I've talked, as you have also, to a lot of military officers who couldn't understand why they weren't released to counterattack. What units did counterattack, basically, they did on their own, without any orders whatsoever.
I personally am aware of a number of such individuals who who simply responded as any normal person would in that situation and did what they were able to do, and in fact participated in combat.
Right. And one of those individuals, who was a close friend of mine, was subsequently relieved of command because he had no orders to do what he did.
Because he exceeded his authority.
He exceeded his authority. Another friend of mine who has a son in a branch of the Air Force, which could have played a major role in repelling the invasion, indicated that his son was sitting in a cockpit, unable to take off because there were no orders allowing him into combat.
I can confirm that.
So
I can confirm that. Avi Weiss mentioned this as well. I omitted to mention. The commander of Southern Command at 11:20 on that day ordered that no cars or bikes be allowed to move from the Gaza envelope, from within Israel into Gaza, because they understood that people were being taken hostage into Gaza. So he ordered that any such bikes or cars or vans, whatever, be stopped. Now, the only military force that would have been able to prevent that was the Air Force. But because the order was never executed, because the Air Force was grounded, and therefore all those people were kidnapped and taken to Gaza.
Well, my friend's son, when I asked him, like, were you interested in implementing the Hannibal Doctrine, which is the doctrine that allows the Army and Air Force to essentially kill Israelis that are being taken prisoner or hostage? He said, no. He said, we were just going to go up and down the fence on the Arab side, on the Palestinian side of the security barrier, preventing more of them from coming across. That's all. He said nobody was talking about the Hannibal Doctrine because nobody knew what was going on, apart from the fact that there was an invasion at multiple points along the security barrier. So I said, well, why did you just take off? And he said, well, if I knew then what I know now, he said, probably all of us would have just taken off and done whatever we could. He said, that isn't going to happen again. But of course, it's too late. The damage, as you said, had been done already. So when you have all these protesters out there, leftist garbage out there, talking about how Bibi Netanyahu was the one, singularly responsible, exclusively responsible for what happened on October 7th, when in fact we know so much now about who was actually responsible for this debacle that occurred on the Simchat Torah, that it's clear that the left will do anything it possibly can to obscure the culpability or even just deny the culpability of their own politicians and generals and protesters, shall we say, that blindsided the country as to what was going to happen on October 7th. It's clear now also, it's been published, that the Haliwa and the military intelligence never made a certain information available, even to people like Hezbollah Levy or Netanyahu's military advisor, namely the Hamas war plan, which was being basically confirmed daily by those poor girls that were observing the border. Basically, when you're facing the possibility of a war, you have certain what's called indications and warning. They're like boxes that you can check off, that certain things are happening, and that when enough of those boxes are checked off, you know that something's going to happen and you have to react. Well, virtually all of the boxes outlined in the Army's indication and warning about a possible Hamas invasion were
They
checked.
knew this already at 2 a.m.
Correct. Absolutely correct. And as we know now, in the days and weeks leading up to that time, some of the girls, the observers, border observers, were actually threatened with jail sentences if they kept bothering their superiors. So
and pointing out to them that they were observing war preparations.
Absolutely, because they were checking the boxes. Okay, so now we have another layer of, well, I'll call it what it is, treason on the part of the military justice system and the attorney general. Treason. And the fact that, as was reported in this by this indicated by this reporter, that the military judicial system had their lawyers already and posted up in the bore, in the pit. And these are the people on the tactical level that I call, socialist commissars, who can override tactical decisions by the officer, on-site officer. Well, the last time we had something like this, or we witnessed something like this, was during the Russo-German War between 1941 and 1945, where you had commissars literally overriding what the professional officers, Soviet officers, could do or not do. So there's such a level of knowledge now that's available that absolutely condemns the left in this country for what's happened. You can understand now why they've mounted this insane campaign to basically accuse the right of being responsible for what happened on October 7th. And now we know, we'll talk about this later, but we know that in the wake of the tragic execution of 6 of our hostages, that Yair Lapid, the left-wing hostage family organizations, swung into action, calling for a general strike, as if Bibi Netanyahu and the coalition government was responsible for this, and that Arnon Bar-David, who's the head of the Histadrut, just is following through. This, as you and I both have indicated, the left would rather burn this country down rather than A, admit any culpability for what happened on October 7th, or B, allow a right-wing or conservative government to rule for one additional day. And we're seeing this today. How in God's name can you have a general strike in the middle of a war? I mean, excuse me for pointing out the obvious, but this is treason, plain and simple, treason. And all the individuals calling for this strike, whether they're from the left-wing hostage families or politicians like Yair Lapid or the head of the Histadrut, right now should be in jail. No question. Should be in jail. And I can already hear the demonstrators from where I'm living screaming and yelling, for the government to fall.
And why was this general strike called? And why are these rabid, regressive, woke maniacs rioting? Because our enemies, Hamas, executed 6 hostages. So that's somehow the fault of their political enemies within Israel.
Correct. So,
which of course now is simply a way of encouraging the Hamas to execute more hostages.
That's why I call it treason. They are aiding and abetting an enemy in time of war.
They have been doing that from the first day.
correct. Many months ago, it was reported on channel. One of my comments was reported on Channel 14. It basically said that unless we start arresting some of these rabid leftists, including those in the hostage families and their organizations, that they would become advocates of Hamas. And that's exactly what's happened. Who benefits from this? Who benefits? Hamas. I call that treasonous behavior. And they should be handled accordingly. Especially this Arnon Bar-David. The man should be behind bars right now, facing a treason charge. I mean, I saw him. He looks like a Tammany Hall, big fat guy. All he needs is a big cigar, and a bottle of vodka.
That's exactly right. He is a Labour Party old school Mapai, for those who are familiar with the term. That is to say, the Ben Gurion pre-Labour Party, Labour type party that ruled this country with an iron fist for 29 years until Begin came to power in 1977, according to the Gregorian calendar, Tafshin Lamed Zayin, but in fact has continued to be in power from that day to this because of Menachem Begin. And that is why I have
deep state that he never went after.
I have referred to Menachem Begin as the worst prime minister that Israel has ever had the misfortune of being landed with, and I stand by that comment. And I retract my previous comment that I thought so until Bennett and Lapid came along. But in fact, having rethought it, I see that the damage done to this country by Begin was far greater, because he had the historical opportunity at that time in 1977 when he came to power, and was returned to power with an increased majority in 1981 to dismantle the previous Israeli deep state, all the bureaucracy, all the government apparatus, everything that had been infiltrated and completely controlled by Ben Gurion and his minions for 29 years. He could have dismantled all of that. And he chose deliberately not to. He acted like some naive Polish gentleman, as if he was dealing with upstanding citizens who accept the democratic process and who are not motivated purely by power. And that is why the father of the Israeli deep state as it exists today is Menachem Begin.
And we also have to mention, because a lot of people seem to have forgotten it, that he was the one that authorized the forced closure of the Yamit settlements. That was the preparation, actually, for what happened during the disengagement to Gush Katif. So I totally agree with you that on any level, except for the bombing of the Iraqi reactor, which he is to be praised for, he was a disaster, a complete disaster, and we're living with the consequences of his
naivete,
inability,
and foolishness,
his limitation. Right, we're living with the horrible consequences. I'm looking out the window now, and I can see it. These morons with their bullhorns and their flag, their yellow flags. My wife Rivka has a great response to them, by the way, when they're screaming at me because they hate me, because of who they think I am. Her answer to them has always been, she says, "Refuah Shlema," and they don't get it.
In other words, may Hashem send you a complete recovery from your disease.
Correct.
I will round out this section of our discussion today with one more important piece of information of which I not long ago became aware. This is not conjecture, this is fact. I cannot explain how I know this from where I know it, but I do know it from extremely reliable sources. At 5 a.m. on that day, on the 22nd of Tishrei, on the 7th of October, certain Shabak, that is to say the GSS, the General Security Service, Israel's internal security service, operatives who lived near the border were told by phone message to pick up with their families and immediately leave the area. That was at 5 a.m., an hour and a half before the invasion and the attack began. Another piece of information to put in for people to place in their pipe and smoke and contemplate.